Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Linus, also known as Cledo, and welcome to the pilot episode of the Lotcast. Right, so what we're going to talk about today is Kinolympics Season 2, which is an event hosted by the Lot, which is a film discussion Discord server that we are all a part of. And the way this event works is essentially 16 people each pick a country that they represent, and they go up against one another in a single elimination tournament style bracket, where each week they pick two films from that country that sort of best represents that country's cinema, and they go up against one another. We watch both films and we decide which one was better. The winner progresses to the next round where they pick a different film, while the loser is eliminated. Currently, we are 11 weeks into the event, and the round of 16 has already wrapped up, and the quarterfinals are almost fully wrapped up as well. Today I'm joined by a delightful cohort of people. One of them is our household expert in oversized Japanese monsters and a resident British man, Matt, also sometimes
Hello.
known as Kaiju.
Hello.
We're also joined by the man who has seen all the films, over 7,000 of them. I don't actually believe you have a niche, Geoff. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I'll just say your niche is just seeing every film that's out there.
Yeah, basically.
And lastly, we are also joined by our resident babushka and connoisseur of Wit and weird Japanese cinema, Elaina.
Hello.
So the first four countries in the event were Hungary, represented by the fifth seal, sort of a 1976 philosophical film. It's Hungarian, so you know it's going to be very sad. And it was up against an Australian film called Two Hands, a 1999 film, which was actually starring a young Heath Ledger. Right, so right off the bat, Geoff, I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
Notoriously, The Fifth Seal was sort of one of the most well-received films of the whole event. I mean, sorted by average rating that we sort of given these films, it was one of the sort of highest ranked ones. And not only that, it was one of the films that had sparked the most discussion, and everyone just sort of in general seemed to like it. So I think it's fair to assume that it's quite a bit of a crowd favorite. So I was actually wondering, why do you think that's the case? What separates this film from some of the other ones we've seen in the event and that haven't been so positively received? What did you think of the film?
No, that's a great question. I think what's so special about The Fifth Seal is that it's fairly straightforward, like of a movie. It's just about common man dealing with Nazis taking over their town, and how do you respond to that? How do you react to that? And that's something I feel like everybody, and like you always see these World War II movies where there's sometimes loftier characters in higher power, or maybe they're coming from a more well-educated viewpoint on the occupation, but these people are just your average men coming together, stuck in a room, while Nazis are destroying their culture, their people outside. So how do you deal with that? And that's kind of what the movie's about, is these common folk looking at it from a philosophical point of view, and what can they do? And right when the ending kicks in, right, it kind of either flips what they were talking about for the whole movie or reinforces what they were saying. It's just different for each character that's in the room together.
Yeah, it certainly has quite a unique structure for a film where it sort of presents this philosophical dilemma and sort of by the end flips it on its head. What do you think about that, Matt?
I think any film that is inherently based in like philosophical ideas is guaranteed to generate more discussion because you can naturally like the ideas presented are going to spark thoughts within your own mind. I think there was a lot of that in the server. Like I remember there being a lot of like huge discussions about whether you agreed with the philosophy of certain characters within the film. I think that also like your last question helped us separate it from other films. Like compared to some of the other entries, it's like very naturally geared towards generating discussion, like within the people who watch it. That's sort of its like main purpose as a film.
Yeah, definitely.
Totally.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Elaina?
Yeah, I think that the structure of the film is one of the things that lends itself best to discussion and also I mean, it takes place within a very specific time and it's a setting that's not exactly like relatable to us in our everyday lives, but the philosophical questions that are presented in such a way that you are able to adopt some of those ideas and reflect on them yourselves because there's that philosophical discussion at the start of the film that's very abstract and about if you would rather be powerful and live a I don't know, not be able to like have repercussions for your actions, would you take that over being like abused or I guess live a life of like extreme torture and pain, I guess, but have this thought that you are completely innocent in that. And that's like a very abstract question, but in the later parts of the film, it's put into practice. And I think it can be put into practice in a lot of different settings. It's not specifically a World War II setting, and I think that's part of what's great about it is it presents that idea in an abstract way that lends itself well to reflection, but also shows that abstract idea in practice.
I think it's probably no surprise. Well, spoiler alert, the film did beat the Australian film in the first round, and actually, the Hungary also advanced in the second round, where it faced off against the winner between Estonia, which was represented by November, a sort of 2018 folk horror film, which went up against Belgium, The Broken Circle Breakdown, 2012 film, I think, that essentially was like a sad drama about grief. And Hungary not only beat Australia, but it also beat Estonia in the second round. So I was wondering, Matt, what do you think actually Hungary's chances to advance even further in the event and potentially even win the whole thing? What do you think about the choices that they made so far?
I mean, yeah, the choices so far have been strong. I don't really like the second round pick that much, but I think Hungary is, as in general, has quite a large wealth of cinema, and a lot of it's quite underseen. And there's always that feeling of when you're watching something that's less seen, it is a bit more excitement with that. And I think Hungary kind of brings that to the table a bit more than other countries might.
Geoff, you're a man that has seen many films. Would you have gone for any sort of different choices?
Honestly, I don't know if I would because I feel like an important part of a lot of Hungary cinema is just often dealing with World War II because it had such a huge impact on their country and their people and their culture. And all the big popular Hungary movies deal with World War II to some degree. And you could have chosen, Belatar, and I think that would have been an easy pick. And it wouldn't surprise me necessarily to see him get picked maybe later on as like a finishing movie pick. But I don't know. I think it's, so far I've really enjoyed the choices. They've been interesting and different, which is appreciated.
Yeah, I very much agree, and I think we could still see a Bellatar film coming up in the next couple of rounds. Right, so as you may have noticed, I have sort of glossed over the three other countries in this round, partially because they lost, but also because I feel like their films haven't been quite as well received. But I was actually wondering, do you have any other notes, any of you, on some of these other films? Elaina, maybe you have something to say about some of the other films that have been eliminated in this side of the bracket.
I don't know. I think that Hungary has the strongest picks of those four countries, partially because I think the strategy of picking has been pretty good with them. But I think that the reception of Broken Circle Breakdown was really interesting because it's something that's on the surface is quite a bit more conventional or polished than some of the other ones. I think that November has a specific niche, and so if
Very
it,
much so, yeah.
and not appealing to everyone is really not all that surprising. But I thought that even though a lot of people didn't like Broken Circle Breakdown, I mean, I guess myself included, it did spark some interesting discourse around, um, I suppose, I mean, method of depiction and the emotions that the story was meant to invoke. Um, for those of you who didn't see it, it revolves around a couple dealing with the death of their child, which is a very it's a really difficult thing to portray. And so I don't think that it was exactly perfect in that portrayal. On some level, kind of emotionally exploitative, in my opinion, but I know that some people might watch it and really feel it and connect with it. But I thought that the discourse around that one was particularly interesting because of its subject matter. And
I agree.
having some pretty visceral reactions.
The ending in particular, at least for me, was pretty disappointing. I guess we're gonna get a little spoilery here, but right, the whole suicide
Yeah.
at the end
Yeah.
might not be pretty. I don't know if disrespectful is the right word, but it was just very.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like quite emotionally manipulative. It kind of just puts this into the plot just to try and make as much of an emotional impact as it can. I think that's quite transparently
Mhm.
manipulative. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people just didn't respond to that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Whereas
that
like
Yeah.
some of the other picks, I feel like November, it's just maybe it wasn't quite for you, or Two Hands, it was like, well, that's just, some people don't like that sort of action film. But yeah, I think that the discourse around Broken Circle Breakdown being somewhat manipulative or depicting certain events in a certain light, I think was a particularly interesting thing about the first 2 weeks as well.
Yeah, for those who essentially don't know or haven't seen the film, I remember someone even sort of wrote this comment. I can't remember who, so sorry, I guess, that we're not giving you credit. But yeah, someone said that essentially it's manipulative in a way that essentially a commercial prodding you to donate to, say, cancer researchers, where it just sort of shows the sad thing, shows the tragedy, but it doesn't really dig into it. And it's quite emotionally manipulative in that sense.
Yes.
And I would have
Agreed.
liked to see it humanize that child more. She's on screen very little. There's very little done to, I guess, humanize that experience, and so it kind of just boils it down to, I guess, the
You
emotional,
child.
what they believe will be
yeah.
emotionally impactful, and not actually like humanizing that experience.
Yes, totally. What I did like
Yes.
about the movie though was the music itself. That was really the
Yeah, I thought
highlight for
Oh, yeah,
me.
music was nice.
Yeah, I guess we should have also mentioned that the film, one of the protagonists of the film is part of this Belgian country band, so he naturally performs some songs, and it's quite well done.
Yeah, I did think that the music choices. I mean, I can understand the music maybe wasn't for everyone, but I liked the music choices as well. I thought that was definitely a strong point of the film.
Right, so I think we're going to move on to the next four countries, partially because this is where things get spicy. Because one thing that I hadn't mentioned yet is that all three people, well, aside from me in the podcast, are also representing their own country in this event. And as I mentioned, Matt is British, and he is actually representing UK. So in the sort of next round, United Kingdom, represented by Road, went up against Denmark, represented by a 2003 film, The Green Butchers. This is sort of like a comedy with a very sort of normalish writing structure featuring Mads Mikkelsen. So, Matt, one thing that I want to ask, since you were representing UK, why did you choose this particular film, this particular director? Just sort of give a rundown of your thoughts. Why just sort of go down this route in particular?
Alan Clark, who directed Road, is one of my favorite directors in general. I think the way he works, and especially his formal qualities with his camera room, is very fascinating. And I think Road is like maybe the most Alan Clark film that Alan Clark made. It's got all his hallmarks. It's got all his trademarks. It's got the socially alienated characters, the class analysis, and of course like the Steadicam, which is his most iconic technical feature. And I think it's a fascinating work, and I would just thought people would naturally respond to it as a piece of like a depiction of this very depressing and very almost apocalyptic time in British society, with when the economy was pretty much in free fall for most of the country.
Yeah, definitely. For those who don't know, I suppose Alan Clark was essentially this British TV director who made various films for TV, for BBC, and essentially during his lifetimes, while some of his films certainly garnered some success, he has been sort of redeemed as of late, and certainly his status has been elevated to that even of an auteur quite recently. And some of the other films he's quite famous for would be Made in Britain, Penda's Fen, The Firm, the original one with Gary Oldman. And if I recall correctly, Geoff, you were also quite a big fan of this film. Do
Yes.
you have any thoughts on it?
Well, Road was, I would say it was my second Alan Clark movie that I had seen. I'd seen Scum beforehand, was really taken aback by it, but I never really
Yeah.
must have been inspired to go deeper. But after watching Road, I was so blown away by its depiction of poverty and this feeling of being stuck in a location, right? There's this really, the whole movie it's not a long movie. It's about like an hour and maybe 10 minutes or so. Not even maybe. But a lot of the movie is people just walking endlessly down a similar street over and over. So it's just this feeling of you can't escape this loop of terrible poverty that you're stuck in Road, and that theme is so wonderfully captured, right, with the Steadicam footage just following them uncomfortably close the whole time. I found that so wonderful and really impactful. So it definitely inspired me to check out some more of his movies, and I've really, really been enjoying diving more deep into his filmography and his BBC productions for television.
Do you have any thoughts on the film, Elaina?
I liked Road. I don't think I liked it quite as much as everyone else, but I did appreciate especially like how uniquely British the experiences of it are and how it really captures a specific place and moment in time. And I feel like even if it didn't really connect with me as personally or I didn't love it as much as everyone else, I think that it was like a great pick because part of what I like about the event is learning about all these different countries through their cinema, and I feel like that was like a perfect example of like what you could learn about, a specific British experience through that film.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was really great, and it's picking something that was very uniquely British, which
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I
As
agree with that.
you probably may have
Yeah.
noticed already with some of the sort of picks that we've been going through, most people in this event tend to go for sort of the more obscure film. Like Matt hasn't necessarily gone for Train Spotting, and similarly, the Hungry person hasn't necessarily gone for a Bella Tarr film. And people have sort of been tending to find more niche films to sort of represent. So actually, in that angle, Matt, since you actually won against Denmark in this round, and in the second round, you actually picked a folk horror film. Do you want to tell us about that at all?
What about the folk horror, or like picking more
You're
obscure
picking the
choices?
second round.
Oh well, again, I think the aim with me in this event was to try and be as like culturally representative, and I think folk horror has a long tradition in this country of making good films.
Yeah, definitely.
And A Warning to the Curious, which is my second round pick, especially because it draws from so much of like it's based on Anglo-Saxon folklore. Yeah, I think the way where it's filmed, like a lot of people have this very when they're young, a lot of people go to seaside towns in this country. A lot of these places are very isolated, very depressing. I think the film very much invoked that kind of mood, and I felt that made it even more culturally representative beyond sort of the folklore aspects of it.
Do you have any thoughts on the film, Geoff?
Well, A Warning to the Curious is part of this. Well, it's directed by Lawrence Gordon Clark, who is kind of famous in BBC for his Ghost Story for Christmas series, which on Christmas they would show a ghost story of some kind that was usually from a British author in his writing. So he's got a couple of series. Yeah, yes. So he's got a couple of those, and they're all, I think, like really fantastic. Just not only ghost stories, but just depictions of British cultures and fears, maybe of what's in their history, I guess. And also, I think it's just funny that they showed horror movies on television for Christmas. Like, okay,
Yeah, definitely.
that's just
Yeah.
great. So I think that's a lot of fun. I know I think, are just restarting that series now, like in 2022. So definitely be on the lookout for that.
Yeah. I haven't seen any of them, but yeah, I've heard they've been doing.
I really liked A Warning to the Curious as a pick. And I think, yeah, both very like British TV movies, I guess, but Road was a very like angry film, and I really liked the relative minimalism of A Warning to the Curious, and just it's kind of just a very like understated, just like good story, all the way through.
Definitely.
I really enjoyed that part of it. There's no frills. It's just like it's just a good story.
Yeah, it's very simple,
Very
spooky.
simple, to the point, spooky. I really enjoyed it. So it's one of my favorites of the competition so far.
Before we move on, I guess, from Britain, one more question that I wanted to ask you, Matt, is were there any other sort of films that you were considering for either of these two rounds instead of the ones that you picked, or maybe even what you're considering for the next round, if you want to reveal that?
Well, I think I'm definitely going to move away from the TV movie vibe in the next round because I think I've sort of exhausted that. Well, for the first round, I knew I was going to pick an Alan Clark film for the first round. It was just deciding which one because he has so many films, and I think Road, as I said, it's very like if you're going to watch one, that's like his most has all of his idiosyncrasies and all of his trademarks. And I wanted second round. I just wanted to shake it up, like because I think there's a vibe around British cinema. A lot of people think it's just depressing dramas about the working class and things like that. So I wanted to kind of
There are a
introduce
lot
something a
of
little
those.
bit different.
True.
There are a lot of those, but I think British cinema has more to offer than just that. So I'll try and
Yeah,
shake up again in the
definitely.
next round.
Moving on from that, in the next matchup, Mexico went up against Hong Kong, and one thing you should know about the law is that we do love our Hong Kong film. So in this round, Mexico was represented by Macario, a 1960s fairy tale film adaptation of the sort of famous tale called Godfather Death, and it went up against Chinese Ghost Story, which I feel like the title is pretty self-explanatory of what that film is.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now, the interesting thing about this matchup is that it was sort of the first matchup that was extremely close and was actually decided by a single vote. So I was wondering, what were your thoughts just on this matchup? Both of the films, perhaps. Which one do you prefer of them?
Well, for me, Macario was really fascinating because it's a movie about Day of the Dead, which is such a when you think of Mexico, that's probably one of the first things you think about is the Day of the Dead celebration and how that
Yeah,
all
definitely.
works. And at least for me, I can't think of many movies that aren't animated that talk about that day and that celebration. So it was fun seeing a movie from the '60s that deals with it, talks about it, and you kind of experience it with the characters. And there's a lot of magical realism in it, and I love that kind of stuff. So it was really I really enjoyed my time with that one. And then in comparison to that, you got Chinese Ghost Story, which is just balls to the wall insanity, like nonstop,
Yeah.
with action and yelling and crazy. It's nuts, but it's so well done and knows exactly what it is. And that is always a treat to watch with movies like that, where they know exactly what they want to do and they deliver it perfectly. And I mean, the action is just so cool in that
Yeah.
movie. Really
Yeah,
fun to watch.
definitely.
And a few of us watched Chinese Ghost Story on stream. I don't know if anyone in this call was on that stream.
No,
Oh,
I watched it by myself.
okay. Yeah, but it was very fun to watch in a group just because like how crazy it was. And I think that you could get on it for being tacky or being really like 1980s, but it's so self-aware in that, and it's just
Mhm.
you kind of just have to let go and just be like, this is crazy and I'm enjoying
Yeah,
it.
definitely.
Yeah, that was definitely, I think that was kind of a risky pick because it's a genre film and not, a standard drama like a lot of other people have been going for. But I think that it really worked out because I think that the people who liked it a lot, and I think that that's what led it to win.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and I appreciate the kind of crazy pick right out of the gate. Um, I think that that was like a really um good moment. And as far as I thought the Mexico pick was also great. I think that it had some like weird narrative inconsistencies that led me to not like it as much, but the like I said, yeah, something that's like kind of a uniquely Mexican tradition, and I liked some of the imagery in it. I think there's that. I mean, I guess it's a little spoilery, but the idea of like the lives as candles burning down is like a depiction that
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think that
That's
that
cool, yeah.
depiction is so cool, and it's kind of somewhat borrowed from the silent film Destiny uses that as well. So I kind of liked, if that's an intentional nudge, I kind of liked that part. But I thought they were both great picks. It was a really tough round. I ended up voting for Chinese Ghost Story just because I appreciated the craziness of that pick. But Macario was definitely a great pick for Mexico as well.
I think what's interesting is a Chinese Ghost Story is kind of a famous entry point as well to that kind of genre work from Hong Kong. It's not. I don't think it goes so crazy into the lore and the insane storytelling that sometimes those movies have. It's mostly just people running around and screaming, which is very easy to just enjoy.
Rapping at one point.
Yeah,
Great description.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of just
Yeah.
funny moments.
Right. There's nothing super intense or it doesn't ask a lot of you as a viewer, which
Yeah.
is really great. It's just nice, easy way to get into that genre. Because as you get more into it, there's a lot of Buddhist and philosophical questions that they answer while they're flying and kicking around. So it's a good, I think, establishing movie for that genre.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say if you're a fan of these sort of like really wacky 80s American sort of action films, then it would definitely be a film worth checking out because it does have a lot of those aspects, but they're sort of mixed in with the Chinese culture and Chinese religion, and they also have like these sort of magical realism element. It's all just over the top insanity.
Yeah, I think both great picks that round. It was a pretty
It
good
was a
round.
strong round. It was a strong round.
Strong round. It was, and it was
Yeah.
sad for Mexico that lost, but it was a tough competition. So
Hmm.
Well, speaking of tough competition, naturally, sort of Hong Kong progressed into the second round where it sort of matched up against Britain, and then it lost by a single vote, as far as I can remember. And if you've been sort of keeping up with the praises we sung for Hungary, the actual semi-final or sort of the final for this side of the bracket is actually Hungary against UK. So I was wondering, obviously match your bias, so I'm not sure if I should ask you, but who do the rest of you think is actually going to win this matchup? Who do you see winning, Hungary or UK?
I
Ooh.
think that's tough. It depends on what they go for.
Yeah,
I
I think if Hungary goes for like a Bellatar pick, it could be an easy win. I mean, I guess it depends on which one they pick. um, but that one is such a big name and carries a
sometimes
lot of weight.
sometimes it backfires though. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes
that's
people
backfired in this
appreciate.
competition. Yeah.
That's very
I
true.
think
That is true,
sometimes
yeah.
people appreciate the obscure pick.
Mhm.
I honestly don't even know enough about Hungary to know what
Well,
kind of strong movies are left.
here's a different question than Elena.
Hmm.
Based on the two films that both countries picked so far, if you had to sort of vote for one right now, which one would you choose to be in the final?
If I just based on past experience.
Yeah, based on the past two
Oh
films.
God, I don't know. I think that they're both like obviously two of the strongest in the competition. I think that they just appeal to different people. I think that the Hungary picks have appealed to my own tastes, but I didn't even vote for Hungary in the second round, so it's really hard. It's really hard to say. Oh, I don't know. I'm
Who would you go
tempted.
for, Geoff?
I'm gonna put my vote behind Matt and UK. I think.
It's because he's here, isn't it?
No, I'm just a little more cynical. I think maybe.
Okay.
It's
I
just
don't have enough power in predicting to really even begin to guess how I think that that round will go.
it'll be a good matchup though. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely one of the
Yeah, I'm looking forward
ones
to
that
it.
everyone, including Matt, is looking forward to. Right. So I think we're going to move to the other side of the bracket where things, yet again, get a bit spicy because The first matchup here is actually between Yugoslavia, which isn't a country anymore, but it was allowed for this pick, possibly because the tournament organizer picked it. So a bit, a bit of corruption involved, possibly. The
Right.
film was also 3 hours long, and the limit was shorter films, I believe. So it's a bit dodgy, but we're going to overlook it. And Yugoslavia went up against Senegal, which was represented by our friend who has seen all the films, Geoff.
Yes. All movies ever.
Yes, indeed. So, Geoff, you actually, for this round, you picked an Ousmane Sembene film, who, for those that don't know, he's essentially like the most famous Senegalese auteur. He famously made Black Girl. So here's the question, Geoff. What prompted you to go for this film in particular and not something like Black Girl instead?
For me, I was looking for something that would represent Africa in a more modern scenario, because I also feel like Black Girl is such an easy pick to start with because it's such a wonderful movie, but it's fairly old. So the issues that are being dealt with in that movie are certainly still a thing, but the movie that I picked, Mulan, is a little more modern in the issues that they cover with genital mutilation and women's rights in the country and how they navigate that landscape.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure I also mentioned, but Yugoslavia was represented by Underground, a sort of infamous Amir Kusturit's epic about the country itself from 1995.
Yeah, which is a truly fantastic movie in my opinion. I love that movie. So that was a hard
Yeah, same.
week for me.
Well, interestingly enough, I know we have someone in the call who's not that big of a fan of that film, so I wanted to hear her thoughts. What did you think of
On
this matchup?
Underground, I didn't rewatch Underground for this. I saw it back in December
enough,
or
yeah.
January before we did our long films list. And it really seems like something on the surface that I would really like. There was just something about it that kind of lost me. I think that maybe it's like comedic elements, or there's just something about it that I lost interest in it within the first hour, and that was kind of it for me. And I'm sorry. um, yeah, it's something on the surface that I thought I would really enjoy, because I like so much Eastern European cinema. But um, I so I think it was a tough matchup though, because I know that that film is definitely loved by a lot of people. But I really liked the Senegalese pick, just because again, it's just something that's deals with some questions that are like unique to Senegal or unique to certain like cultures that I'm not super familiar with myself, but I liked the um what it explored and how it explored the topic of female genital mutilation, which is a really heavy topic, but
Yeah, definitely.
showing it with quite a bit of nuance. And yeah, like Geoff said, I like that it shows something with Africa in a modern light, and how these things still affect these communities, and also cultural shifts and cultural changes and the difficulty of cultural change. It was really great in that regard. Uh, I feel like I learned a lot from it, and African cinema is definitely an area where I'm very much lacking. So I think that was it made me want to explore more. So I really
That's
liked
good.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm actually not going to just leave Elaina to drown here, and might as well come out and say that I also wasn't that big of a fan of Underground. But I know Matt, you're quite fond of that film as well. So I was
I am.
wondering,
I am.
what do you think of just this matchup in general? Which film did you prefer?
I didn't rewatch Underground for the event, but I saw it a few months ago, and I'm very much a huge fan of it. So I did vote for Yugoslavia, but I did enjoy the Senegalese pick as well. I just think Underground is just this huge bombastic war epic, and I find that so like captivating as a film, because war epics are usually very somber, very depressing, and I think the tone and the way it's laid out is very unique.
Yeah, definitely. So, spoiler alert: the organizer corruption sort of backfired, and Geoff did actually win this round with Muad. But before we actually get to his second film, let's talk a bit about his opponent, which actually came down to be the winner of the Germany versus Ukraine matchup, and Ukraine was actually
Oh.
represented by Elaina.
Yeah. Yep. That was an insane week.
It was, and for
Um,
context, Germany's pick was Terror 2000, 1992 German exploitation film about God knows what, honestly, and let's just say it was the least favorite film for most people of the whole tournament.
I think that round one always kind of has a film that's a bit of a flop, and I wasn't in the lot for round one of Kinolympics season one, but I know that there were some films that flopped in that one too. So it's really not surprising that there was one that was intensely disliked, but I think this was a risky pick that backfired for sure. It was just watching it, it's just I don't even know how to describe it. But it's so intentionally aiming to be like offensive and provocative. Yeah. I just overall didn't enjoy it at all. I see that it's capturing, I know that it's meant to kind of capture tensions over Germany's reunification, and in that regards, it's interesting from a historical standpoint. But it was not pleasant to watch whatsoever. It was just not pretty.
No, yeah, it definitely wasn't.
Yeah, so I think there were a few people who felt positively towards it, but overall, I know that did not go over that well. So I was not that worried about winning that round. I think I knew pretty quickly that it was going to be an easy win for my movie.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess on that, and let's touch upon your pick then, because
yeah,
I think we don't really have any positive things to say about Terror 2000. We don't even really have negative things to say. It's just confusing, baffling, really. Right. So, Elaina, you picked Eva Vivan Kupalo,
yeah.
from 1968 film, which famously is an adaptation of actually a short story by Gogol. And it's interesting because this film was also directed by Yuli Oyenko. It's actually one of the Ukrainian directors that I have sort of heard about. So I was curious, what actually prompted you to pick this film as the representative for Ukraine?
I was pretty positive that I wanted to pick an Ilyenko film during the competition. I was 100% sure basically that I wanted to pick one of his films. I've seen Eva Vivan Kupala and A Spring for the Thirsty. So I was debating between those two films when I made the pick, and I think I decided to come right out with one of his films just because I think that they're very culturally and historically expressive, and one of my goals with my Ukraine picks was to show, especially with like current events, I wanted to show a side of Ukraine that's not really shown in the media, and something that's very like culturally and historically rich rather than something that's more political. And so his films kind of capture that for me. The reason I didn't go for Spring for the Thirsty, which I love that film, but it's very somber, it's very sad, it's very bleak, and I wanted something that it's a really intense movie, and it deals a lot with like cultural memory and personal memory, and I think it's a lot of concepts that are very important to Ukrainian identity, but I just wanted to go with something that had a lot of like overwhelming cultural richness just because I thought it would go over better with the participants. And yeah, just Ivo Ivan Kupala is it's so just rich and like lavish, and colorful, and it sometimes doesn't make a lot of sense, but that kind of just didn't matter to me. It was just something that really showcased that cultural side that I really wanted to depict. So that's why I went with that film in particular. I still think if you're interested in his work, A Spring for the Thirsty is fantastic. It just wasn't something that I wanted to lead with right out of the gate.
I mean, I'd say the film in particular is sort of very flashy in the editing department, especially. Mm-hmm. It's safe to say that it has been received pretty well, considering it hasn't received vote against it in that round, although in part that may have not been due to the film itself. Right, Matt, do you have any thoughts on this matchup?
Well, I think I echo the thoughts of most people when I was not at all a fan of Terror 2000. So I would just gloss over that very quickly. I did enjoy the Ukraine pick. I think it reminded me a lot of something like The Color of Pomegranates, in which is very like sensually like overloading folk tale. It's very expressive, and I enjoyed it. It was a good matchup.
Yeah, I think it's
In
also.
terms of, yeah.
I was just going to say that Ilyenko and Parajanov worked together. Ilyenko is the
Yeah.
cinematographer on Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, so that link is not coincidental. They were very much influential on each other. Yeah.
Right, so if you've been keeping track, the fact that Ukraine won this matchup does mean that it went up against Senegal in the second round. So we had a matchup between Geoff and Elaina. And Geoff went for the little girl who sold the gun, and Elaina actually went for a silent film, from 1930. I'm actually curious, why did you opt for a silent film, Elaina?
I'm not entirely sure, and it didn't quite work out for me. I actually originally wanted to go for something contemporary for the second round, but I kind of struggled to find something that I liked well enough that I wanted to show to everyone else. Especially because I didn't want to pick something that dealt with war. I wanted to pick something that was more of a cultural or historical, something of cultural or historical importance. So it was kind of a last minute pick. I just didn't feel happy enough with any of the contemporary Ukrainian films I had seen. I only saw, I think, like, I had trouble finding one, and the other one I saw I didn't really like that much. So I just decided to go with Earth because it's really, Dovzhenko's films are kind of the origin of Ukrainian cinema. And nobody had picked a silent film in the competition, and I really love silent films. I think people should watch more of them.
There we go.
I
The
kind of
agenda is
just
coming out.
yeah, I just I honestly don't know why I picked it. I just thought that it would be would mix things up and be different from what other people had picked, and yeah, show the cinema history of Ukraine. Yeah, if I had gotten to the third round, I would have looked a little harder for something contemporary. I just, in that moment, wasn't feeling it. I saw another one of Dozhenko's films in preparation. I saw Vinigora. Yeah, but I didn't particularly care for it. Yeah, I don't know. It was maybe a really kind of risky pick on my part, but I'm glad that people saw it. I think it's a very historically important film, so I don't regret the pick. It was a kind of impulsive decision, though, on my part.
Yeah, listen, you may have lost, but you lost in style.
Yeah.
Right, so then, Geoff, you were obviously Elena's opponent, and you picked, well, a Senegalese film. And I know before this round was coming, a lot of people were actually wondering which direction you were going to take this, because you used up the Usman Sembeni pick in the first round, and there isn't really much awareness about Senegalese film outside of that. So can you just guide us through your thought process of picking this film in particular?
Right. So Mbine is kind of like the king of Senegal cinema, to be honest. And he's got a couple contemporaries, but a lot of the cinema in Senegal is shorts or extremely niche culture works that are difficult to find, at least in the West. So it's hard to pick something that I would even like, maybe mainstream is the right word for that.
Yeah.
So I decided to go with Djibril Diop Mambéty, he's probably the second biggest Senegal filmmaker, I would say. He's got a lot of important films.
certainly.
Most people know him for Tuki Puki, which is a fantastic movie as well. But for me, I wanted to try to get people to see things that they normally wouldn't go out of their way to see. And that movie is fairly well known. I know it has a nice Criterion release, and it's been getting a lot of rounds recently. So I wanted to do something else from his career. And I wanted something that was happy and maybe not so depressing, because as much as I love Mulan, it's a heavy movie. It's about horrible things going on in the country. While this movie, The Little Girl Who Sold the Sun, is all about the optimism of the filmmaker and his hopes and dreams for the future of the country. And I really resonated with that. And I think it's important to share films like that from countries like Senegal, who are still trying to overcome their history and become a modern nation. And so having cinema like this that helps show their dreams and their aspirations and what they want to be is, I think, very fascinating and important. So that's why I chose Little Girl Who Stole the Sun. It's also short, which is nice. Everyone likes short movies, so that definitely helps. But
Yeah, definitely.
I thought the response to it was very interesting, though, because I know a lot of people were, I don't know if disappointed is the right word for that, but maybe they didn't like
I think that's a
how,
fair description. Yeah.
yeah, they just didn't like how maybe saturated it was, because it
Yeah.
is pretty. I mean, it's very optimistic and maybe almost too
Sentimental,
much.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a little blind in its version of what the future could be in some ways.
Yeah, I thought that response to it was really interesting as well. I watched the movie without really reading what other people had to say about it. And I thought that it has an optimism for the future, but also, she goes around, she's selling this newspaper. She's just trying to be like everyone else and show that she can do the same things, and there's a lot of like hope in what she's doing, and then people say things of like, that's the government's newspaper. That's like, it's implies that her motivations are somewhat misled, like she doesn't quite understand what she's selling. And I think that aspect of it provided some nuance. I think that if you don't look into that part, it could maybe come off as too sweet or too optimistic or too sentimental. But I think that it also like shows some of the dangers of blind optimism for the future. And I really like that other kind of more nuanced element of it, where you can be happy for her and also acknowledge that sometimes we do things that we think are good and we have a lot of hope, but we don't really understand the weight of our actions. So I really liked that part of it. I think that
Great.
that's a pretty complex message to convey in only 45 minutes. So
Yeah,
I really
sure.
liked the film. I can understand some of the critiques, but I think that it has that other dimension there that's kind of balances its sweetness or optimism.
Matt, you're sort of like an independent adjudicator of this round because you didn't really have a horse in this race, I suppose. So what did you think of these two films? Which one did you sort of prefer? Did anything stand out in either in particular? What are your thoughts?
Well, I did prefer The Little Girl Who Sold the Sun in the end, because I've seen Tuki Wookie before, and I actually think Little Girl was a slight improvement on that film. In terms of Earth, I wasn't crazy about it. I kind of think it didn't really connect the two. It's hard to explain, but it's kind of a Soviet montage film and a silent realist film, and I feel like it didn't bridge those two things as quite as well as I would have liked. It's sort of stuck in the middle of those two things, and that kind of made it a little bit hard to get through at times.
Yeah, I
Definitely.
really am a big fan of his trilogy. I still need to see uh, Zengora. I don't know how to pronounce that one.
I think it's
But
Zendikar.
okay, yeah, that's the only one. I have seen Arsenal, and I did enjoy that one, and Earth as well. So I like how abstract, I guess, the movie is. It's I mean, God, I mean that movie went through so many different recuts when they were making it. I can't even imagine that process. It must have been really frustrating. So the fact that the film is even an experience you can watch and understand is incredible. But I don't know. I really enjoyed the visual imagery that's done in the movie. I think it's an interesting way to look at a country and a people as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's sort of Elaina sort of revealed already. Geoff didn't win this round. Senegal advanced into the sort of semi-final or the final for this side of the bracket. And I think next we can actually move on to the last four countries, which were Netherlands, represented by Amsterdam, sort of like an action murder mystery. Turkey, represented by Time to Love, a drama of sorts, I guess. I'm not really sure how to describe it. Maybe some of the other people can do it better. Also Chile with Cordillera of Dreams, a documentary film, actually the only one in the whole event. And Canada, which was represented by Incendies, that Denis Villeneuve film. Right, so what I wanted to ask, because interestingly enough, there was a bit of a rebellion against the Incendies pick simply because it was, well, quite popular. So here's what I wanted to ask. Why do you think this event sort of there's this preference towards more obscure cinema, and why did Incendies lose in the end? What do you think, Geoff?
Well, for me, part of the fun of Kinolympics is exploring cultures and movies from these cultures that you don't normally experience. And I really like Incendies. I think it's my favorite Villeneuve movie, but it is not a representation of Canada, in my opinion, to really any degree. I guess a little bit with the whole family being there, but it's honestly more about it's a family melodrama, and that's fine. But I just don't. I was looking for something else, maybe something more about Canada itself, or its people, or its culture. That's what more I was expecting, I guess, maybe.
What did you think of the film, Elaina?
I think I agree with Geoff that it's something that's not really representative of Canada. And I think as far as popular picks go, there's nothing against there's no rule against popular picks. You can pick whatever you want as long as it meets the criteria. Um, but I think that people are shying away from more popular picks because you can go find that on your own and watch it yourself. Like,
Exactly.
I don't need Kinolympics to find a popular movie for me. And it's more these deep cuts that I appreciate more because they're not something I would have ever known about without the event. So I think for those reasons, I think I came into the film a little biased against it. Just because it wasn't really about Canada, it was a more popular pick. I don't know if anyone else really entirely agreed with me in this assessment, but I also found it a little emotionally exploitative, and especially exploitative of conflict in the Middle East and like the very real human toll of that, and using it as this like emotional device in the film and not really like humanizing those people or giving them names or giving them stories and just using them in this other narrative. I kind of left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. So I didn't really care for that part of it. There was one scene in particular that really turned me off to the film. So in the end, I think outside of the event, I wouldn't have really cared for it much anyway. I would have liked to see what Canada maybe would have picked after hearing some of these critiques, just because there are some movies out there that are that definitely showcase, uniquely Canadian experiences that aren't really seen very much. I know that people were bringing up something like My Winnipeg or something as, something that was more in the lines of what they wanted to see. I suppose just interesting that there was kind of a strategy of picking a more popular film that seemed like a safe pick that everyone would like, and it kind of backfired. So
Yeah, definitely. I know, Matt, you're more of a fan of the film, so do you want to present the defense, like a case for Incendies?
Well, it is one of my favorite films in general, but I don't see it as emotionally exploitative, and also in the sense that it's based on a play written by a Middle Eastern person. But in terms of I do think picking it was slightly disappointing because I think I definitely agree with some of the fun of this event has been finding films that I haven't heard of before. So picking such a popular movie was, even though I did obviously vote for it because it's like one of my favorite films, but it was somewhat of a disappointing pick in that regard because it would have been nice to see maybe a deeper dive into Canadian cinema.
Yeah, certainly. Since that sort of covers all of the countries, and interestingly enough, Geoff and Matt are still in the tournament. I had actually a question for Elaina, since you're sort of have an unbiased perspective, who do you think? What's your prediction for who's going to take the whole tournament based on what you've seen so far?
So we don't know who will win this round. It's just Netherlands versus Chile. But then we have Hungary, UK, and Senegal left. Before the UK versus Hong Kong match, I thought that it was going to end up Hong Kong versus Senegal, maybe.
Certainly seemed that way, yeah.
And it seemed like Hong Kong had a lot of good picks, a lot of good things to choose from, a lot of variety, that the picks were going over pretty well. I think that a lot of the things that come out of Hong Kong are pretty in line with the server's overall taste. So I think that that kind of shook up some of my predictions. I think that Senegal will win one side.
Okay.
And I think that maybe Hungary will win the other side. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't know. Does that answer your question? I have no idea.
It's good enough.
I don't know
Right
if I
then.
have any preference entirely for which I think. I think that they all have their own strengths. I don't have anyone that I'm particularly rooting for at the moment.
All right then, Matt, you're famously unbiased. Who do you think is going to win the whole event?
Well, I'd say I think the winner of UK and Hungary will probably win it. In my opinion,
Okay.
I think whoever wins that will go on to win the final.
I'm inclined to agree with that.
Yeah. No offense,
Do
Geoff.
you want to make a case for yourself, Geoff? Present an argument why you might win the whole thing?
I mean, I would like to win. That'd be cool, but I'm not necessarily expecting it. I'm amazed I've made it as far as I have, to be honest. So I've got plenty more interesting picks to come. So we'll see.
Very nice.
Excited to see.
All right. So last but not least, sort of a quick question right before we wrap up. I wanted to ask each one of you to give one recommendation from the whole event for the people listening to maybe seek out and give a watch if they can track it down. Do you have any film in mind, Matt?
What that we watched as part of this event?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to exclude both stuff I've watched previously, and obviously my picks. I think I'm going to say November because I think, although I think it's flawed in some way, I just think it's a fascinating piece of like culturally representative work from Estonia and from Estonian folklore. I just think it was a very interesting watch for me, so I'll go with that.
Great choice, if I do say so myself. Geoff, do you have a recommendation?
I would probably pick Macario, personally. I really enjoyed that, and I feel like Mexican cinema doesn't really get a lot of starlight. So I think that's a great movie to start with.
All right, Elaina?
I know that it's probably the best received of the event, but I'm probably gonna go with Fifth Seal, just because I think that it's something that lingers the most and gives the most to think about. I think that if I were to take one film from the competition so far and recommend it to someone, I think it would be that one, just because of the questions I think it raises and what someone can learn from it.
Yeah, certainly. I was going to say Fifth Seal or November myself, but since those have been taken now, I guess I'll give a shout out to Chinese Ghost Story. I think it's one of the more unique and fun films of the event, and would certainly be a unique, fun little watch. Right. Do any of you have any sort of shout outs or anything else you wanna say right before we wrap up?
No, but thanks for hosting.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining, and we'll see you whenever.